As he's sworn in for a second term, Governor Deal stresses the need for Democrats and Republicans to work together to pass key legislation this session. Deal knows he'll need to reach across party lines to pass a major education bill and to get help on funding for new roads. Religious leaders and legislators opposed to the religious liberty bill speak out on the same day that marchers descend on the Capitol to say they fear their right to espouse their beliefs freely is threatened. It's day 2 of the 2015 session. Lawmakers starts now. Good evening and welcome to one of GPB's proudest traditions. Anyway, tonight officially kicks off the beginning of our 45th consecutive season of Lawmakers. So let's get started in a moment, except we want to show you a little clip. Do you remember the days before they invented real color TV? Well, they had color TV, but that is a shot of the Georgia General Assembly back in 1971. I'm probably the only one at this table who remembers those days. Well, maybe Galloway and Eric Tannenblatt, but we'll get to that in just a little while. Look, tonight we officially kick off our new season of Lawmakers, and we're looking forward to being with you throughout the legislative session. Let's get started with an evening of a report from the state capitol, where we have Pat St. Clair standing by to tell us about what happened down there today. Pat?
Thank you, Bill. Well, for the second year in a row, the Religious Liberties Bill is starting off as a hot topic here under the dome. House Bill 29, sponsored by Representative Sam Teasley of Marietta, has clergy lining up on both sides of the issue. Now, there was a rally here today to support the bill and criticize the firing of Atlanta Fire Chief Kelvin Cochran by Mayor Kasim Reed. The mayor says he fired the chief for personnel reasons, while Cochran says he was fired because he wrote a book about his religious beliefs.
To all of the remaining city employees, if you seek to live out the true meaning of our nation's pledge and constitution and have a faith, a living faith that does justice, and believe that sex between a man should be between a man and a woman in the bonds of holy matrimony, we have made a great statement that you better keep your mouth shut or you will be fired.
After Cochran spoke, the group marched to City Hall to deliver petitions to the mayor. But earlier today, other clergy members spoke out against the Religious Liberties Bill.
If you took a poll of religious leaders about this religious freedom, House Bill 29, they would, for the most part, be lined up here with us. And as I said in my remarks earlier, nobody asked the faith community if we wanted this bill.
It's a small group of people who are attempting to drive this through in our state and in other states. And it doesn't reflect an agenda that serves Georgia.
State Senator Nan Orrock opposes the bill. Governor Deal says he might support it based on an early draft of the bill that he's seen. Stay tuned. Well, business titans and legislative leaders sipped orange juice and dined on omelets at today's annual Eggs and Issues breakfast, sponsored by the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. The event brings business leaders and lawmakers together to see how they can align their goals and priorities. Several hundred business leaders from Georgia's top companies listened as Governor Nathan Deal, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle, and House Speaker David Ralston outlined legislative priorities for this year. One of the biggest issues on the agenda is funding Georgia's aging and neglected transportation system. Speaker Ralston says it can't wait.
I'm not certain what the final package will look like. I am sure that we will embrace some options and reject others. But let me be clear on one point. Doing nothing is not an option.
Governor Deal echoed the sentiment but gave no indication of how transportation improvements should be funded, promising to reveal more in tomorrow's State of the State address.
While many suggestions and opinions are on the table, I want to make it clear here this morning that I support increasing funding for strategic transportation investments.
A comprehensive transportation study suggests it could take up to $1.5 billion each year to repair and maintain the state's aging bridges and roadways. The governor also said that he supports education reforms, such as allowing the state to take over failing schools, and a plan that would let 10th graders who pass the SAT enroll in college. The governor is also proposing the creation of a Georgia Film Academy to help strengthen the state's growing film industries. Supporters of medical marijuana gathered at the state capitol today to talk about their disappointment over a major change made Friday to a bill sponsored by Representative Alan Peake. Now, that bill, which would regulate the use and production of medical cannabis oil to treat certain conditions, will no longer include a provision to grow and distribute medical cannabis in Georgia. That means patients will still have to go to other states to get the oil. Covington, Georgia native Mike Hopkins moved his family to Boulder, Colorado last year to get cannabis oil for his 9-year-old daughter, Michaela. She has a seizure disorder. He was deeply disappointed by the change in the bill.
We were stunned. We were hoping to come home. The new House bill does not allow us to come home legally.
Hopkins became emotional as he talked about his 2 other special needs children, both of whom died from seizure disorders. He believes the cannabis oil could have saved them. The last-minute change to the bill came after Governor Deal made it clear he would not support the growing and distribution of medical cannabis in the state. Well, Bill, those are some of the issues to look for in this session of the legislature. Of course, we'll start to get some more details about the governor's priority tomorrow when he delivers his State of the State address.
Pat, I know you'll be down at the Capitol for that speech, and we'll have more to report tomorrow night. Let me say, welcome, Pat St. Clair, to the Lawmakers team. We're very glad to have you on board this session and look forward to working with you throughout the next 40 days.
Thank you.
We have again assembled the best political talk group in town. If you watched us last year or if you listened to my show Political Rewind on GPB Radio, you already know the people I'm going to introduce to you. They are Theron Johnson, one of the best-known Democratic political consultants in the Southeast. Among his many successful campaigns, worked with Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed. Also joining us, Jackie Gingrich Cushman, a syndicated conservative columnist and author. Jim Galloway, the longtime political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. His Political Insider blog is featured on the AJC website. It's must-reading if you care about politics. And Eric Tannenblatt, one of Georgia's most highly respected advisors to GOP candidates from local to national levels. So let's talk just very briefly, panel. Welcome to the first edition of Lawmakers this year. Let's just talk very briefly about some of the news that Pat St. Clair reported today. Jim Galloway, you now have these competing interests lining up down there over this religious liberty bill, but for the first time, a number of faith leaders speaking out. But if the governor is going to support this thing, is it going to be fast-tracked in any way?
I'm not sure that it's going to be fast-tracked. House Speaker David Ralston said one thing that was very interesting, and that he says he's trying to understand the intensity of the opposition, i.e. the opposition from the Atlanta and Georgia business community. Home Depot, Coca-Cola, Delta are just dead set against anything, any passage of like that. One thing that was very interesting about that rally was that you did not see the proponents of the religious liberty bills in the mix in that crowd. They were staying away from it. They are convinced that if they are to negotiate with the business community, they have to take the issue away from gay marriage. And Kelvin Cochran doesn't do it. The fire chief does not do that.
Let me give you all a chance to weigh in on this, but Theron, let me start with you. Do we need this? What this bill suggests that people have a right to exercise freely their feelings about their religion, their religious beliefs. Do we need this legislation with a federal law that already provides that?
Well, I think what you're seeing is two sort of factions coming together very early on in the session to really push lawmakers to open up the conversation very early on about this. I agree with Jim. I think it was very key that you didn't see certain people who support the Religious Freedom Bill join the group of faith leaders today in their support of Cochran. And so I think legislators are taking a very careful approach to this bill, and I think they're going to listen to both sides.
I agree. I think it's very interesting. If you look at those that were there prior to that says we don't need this bill, I think to see Rabbi Peter Berg from the Temple, they're talking very openly about how the faith community has not asked for this. The faith community is not talking about this. that he doesn't understand the need for this. I think that really does send a very strong signal. There needs to be some weighted consideration before any move forward.
Yeah, Eric Tannenblatt, the question that we've asked several times in discussing this in the past is, it's one thing to say we're going to protect the rights of Christians to express their beliefs fully and in every context in which they want to. It's another thing when you start looking at other religions. I haven't seen anybody line up an interfaith group to talk about Muslims who support this in terms of their right to espouse their beliefs in many contexts.
Right. I mean, this is the number one priority to some social conservatives, some Christian conservatives, and they're making their voice be known. I think the big issue, and it gets to Jim's point, is and why the business community is so anxious about this. If you remember last year in Arizona, this became a big issue. I mean, they were threatening to pull the Super Bowl that was going to be in Arizona. And, we're now building this new stadium and we're hoping to get a Super Bowl. And so I guess the thing that the legislative leadership and the governor have to really think through is, do they want to try and get this out of the way early? And if they do, what does it look like in order to get it out of the way? Because the longer it festers, especially if the LGBT community believes that this is a discriminatory piece of legislation, which I truly don't believe the authors of this legislation, the sponsors, I don't believe that they're trying to discriminate. But I think it's the view of the LGBT community, because they're not a protected class, that it is discriminatory, that they can really get cranked up, not just in Georgia, but if you get the national LGBT community, they'll get the media.
Which is why I asked if this was going to be fast-tracked. Are they going to try to get this out of the way before that sort of energy can be generated around opposing this bill?
I can definitely tell you this. There have been a lot of talks about where we're going to be the big issues leading up to the session. I mean, transportation has been talked about, but no one probably knew on day 2 of the session that you were going to have this press conference with the faith leaders and talking about this particular matter versus the people who are pushing the bill. So I think it's going to be fast-tracked, because now you're going to have a huge amount of attention to this.
Jim Galloway,
let me disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. Because it is going to be tied to these two major issues: transportation funding and and Governor Nathan Deal's failed school system rescue effort.
It's going to be tied to those?
You've got a 2/3 majority required on the school initiative, and you've got a potential tax increase coming on the transportation funding.
So what Jim Galloway, I hear him suggesting, is that if Democrats want to line up against this religious liberty bill, they're going to say, you want our support for education, this education initiative? Is that what I'm hearing?
No,
you say?
what I'm saying is that Governor Deal needs conservative Republicans.
Oh, the opposite of what I'm suggesting.
On the school system.
Oh.
On the school system.
Oh,
and
okay.
That could be one reason why he's making very friendly sounds to the bill.
Yeah. Well, one of the things he's doing, though, is he's trying to make the bill a lot smaller than it was originally last year. So they're trying to figure out, how can we carve this up? How can we make it just about certain areas and really talk more about the federal level and just basically say this is the same thing at the state, as opposed to making it a broader bill than it was last year. So I think part of what's going to happen is you're going to see the issue try to be narrowed down, so it's a very kind of bland piece of legislation and not as fiery. Another thing, I think, if it goes too far, is that you will have people come in like the Deltas and the Cokes and the big companies, and we'll decide as a community, if we're always a city that's too busy to hate, which we have been for generations, that maybe we need to really think about what we're doing and then move on to things that actually push us forward, which is transportation and education.
And Jim, I think Jim is right. They're talking about the House bill. The Senate bill hasn't even been introduced yet by Senator McCoon. And so if that doesn't get introduced till later in the session, I think they're playing with fire, because this can be a very volatile issue.
It can blow up the session from the very first couple days, as you're suggesting.
Yeah, and I back up my point. I think that, honestly, there was no conversations from folks that I've talked to on the Democratic side about this religious freedom bill, and specifically the press conference that happened today. I think what happened today, it moved it to the forefront, not for negotiating powers. I mean, Democrats are not going to negotiate with a Republican governor about LGBT rights. What they are going to negotiate about is that if he needs a 2/3 majority to do something around education reform, which he may not even do this session, that may be on the table. But the big thing is going to be transportation.
Well, and of course, we should, to just close this out, a lot of this was accelerated because your colleague, Mayor Reed, did fire Kelvin Cochran because of, he says, procedural issues around the book that Kelvin Cochran wrote, in which he essentially condemns gay people as not living a Christian lifestyle, goes after non-Christians, goes after women in some ways. So in some ways, we have your friend the mayor to thank for moving this forward. Let's very quickly, because we got a lot to cover.
Well, the other thing, too, is that the governor is delivering his State of the State address tomorrow. And at the Eggs and Issues breakfast, there wasn't a whole lot that was revealed. So today, there wasn't a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
And so this became the issue. I think once the governor starts laying out his agenda, I think the next 2 weeks are going to be dominated by his agenda.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about that. At the Eggs and Issues breakfast this morning, if there was any news that came out of it, Jim Galloway, it was that the governor, Speaker David Ralston, and the Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle, who'd already kind of spoken on this, all suggested that to get this big transportation package that they all seem to think is necessary, some sort of new revenue is going to have to be generated.
They all said that transportation needed increased revenue. Now, where the money comes from, whether it comes from increased taxes, whether it comes from whether it's offset with income tax cuts, and we have to fill a hole in the general budget in some fashion that we don't know about. That's all that has to be worked out. No Republican yet has raised his hand and said, I'm in favor of a tax increase.
But you've got to come up with...
Yeah, but also they're in favor of doing something, which I think is a huge step. And I think we should all say, you know what, they have the courage to say something has to be done. And I think if you said a year ago...
Until you say what is...
No, I understand, but the first step is saying we actually have to do something. And they all said it's going to be hard, and it's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be easy, but we're going to figure it out together. Now, I think it's also very smart politically that no one stood up, no one wants to be the first one to say, I know exactly how we're going to do it. We want to really have a consensus and have people talk about it, let people's ideas come up, and let it generate naturally. But I think it's going to happen over time, and I think it's very smart for them to do it.
Is this, Eric Tannenbaum, is this one of those issues where there's going to be a lot of negotiations quietly behind closed doors, and then, as Jackie suggests, perhaps we're going to see a united front come forward and say, we all think here's a plan. In other words, we're going to have that kind of way of unrolling this to get a tax increase out there.
Yeah, I think there's been trial balloons that have been floated over the last month since the report came out. And I think that Jackie's right. I think that there is a demonstration of a willingness that we're going to do something. The question is, what is it that they're going to do? How are they going to fund this? And they will come up with some resolution. It will happen.
Yeah, and I said this in AJC. I think, you know, as Jackie mentioned, they've been talking about this transportation solution since the biennial. I think Democrats are really missing out on a great opportunity to build upon what these three people in leadership are saying. I think that Democrats should be out here talking about transit. I don't think it was a mistake that Lieutenant Governor mentioned that in the biennial. But I think what you're going to see is that the public wants a transparent process.
When the governor in his inaugural speech talks about bipartisanship coming together, that's partly what he's saying. He said, I'm going to need your help, Democrats, to get some sort of transportation revenue generated.
This is the first time in a long time. I mean, Jim has been doing this, you have been doing this longer than I have, but I mean, you don't really see a lot of sort of public comments from the Democrats yet. So they're kind of waiting.
Got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the governor's big education initiative that he has been talking about a little bit. But before we go to break, how much do you know about your lawmakers? Representative Ron Mayo is a Democrat representing House District 84 in DeKalb County. He was elected to the Georgia General Assembly in 2008. Did you know that he appeared on Sesame Street as a child? And his dad was actor Whitman Mayo, best known for his role as Grady on Sanford and Son. Now you know. We'll be right back. Georgia has one of the largest state legislatures in the country. 180 members in the House, 56 members in the Senate. Who knew? Well, I think we all really basically knew that we have an awful lot of legislators, and every single one of them has an opinion on every issue that comes before them, which is why we need programs like this. Let me quickly reintroduce our panel. Democrat Theron Johnson, Democratic consultant Theron Johnson. Jim Galloway from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Jackie Cushman, a Republican writer, a blogger, columnist, and Eric Tannenblatt, a Republican who advises many, many Republicans here and around the country. So, welcome back. You know, one of the things that became clear this week, and that the governor talked about at least a little bit, is he's basically got a two-step education reform effort ahead of him. Although he talked during the campaign about equalizing funding, giving more help to poorer school systems around the state, and revisiting the formula that's now happened in '84, I think, quality-based education, he's going to put that off. That's harder, heavier lift. And what he's going to turn to first is a plan to give the state more power to take over failing schools. Is that right, Mr. Galloway?
That's right. That's right. It's a little bit of a change in direction, because we had anticipated a little bit more emphasis on the QBE issue. But this one, the QBE issue, if I'm not mistaken, that doesn't require a constitutional amendment. This is actually the failed school system is actually the heavier lift, and it's patterned after what happened, what Bobby Jindal did in Louisiana. And the question is does the same situation apply? Can you go in? Can the state go in, and is it prepared to go in and take over and remake an entire school system?
So, Jackie, there's a little bit of an irony here. It's usually Republicans who rail against federal intervention in local school systems. They have a Republican governor now arguing that the state ought to get more involved in local school systems. It seems slightly ironic, yes?
I think a little bit, but if you think about it, I mean, we're a lot closer to South Georgia than D.C. is to Atlanta. So in terms of being part of the state and understanding the problems, and I think the other challenge is if you're a governor, and as you know, his family was involved in education, his wife taught, and you understand the importance of education. He's been very involved with preschool and making sure people are ready to go to school and can read. I think if you sit back and watch schools that are failing, and they're not failing themselves, or the teachers, they're failing the students and the children, I think you decide that there has to be something done. And the way you do that is you introduce something new, whether you can take control and make sure they work.
You know, Theron, this seems to me to be one of those issues, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican in the legislature, that you're going to hear from your constituents in your local town, in your community. They're not going to want this, I would think, in many cases, are they?
Look, failing schools in Georgia is a generational problem. I mean, we didn't wake up in 2015 and realize we have failing schools. I think what is interesting is when Republicans now, they got to be very careful how they message this, because they've been very big on local control. And so now you are proposing going into these communities that are failing communities and basically taking over their school system. But the one thing that I think that Democrats and Republicans will have to be very, very careful when it goes to your point, Bill, is parental involvement. I mean, you're going to have to educate parents. How is this going to affect their kids? How is it going to affect their communities? And the last thing is that when you start going into these districts, because Jim mentioned New Orleans, and one interesting thing about New Orleans, every school in New Orleans right now that's under this recovery program are actual charter schools. And so this opens the door for a more robust conversation about charter schools in Georgia.
Which the governor has a very strong record. I mean, he led the constitutional amendment that got passed to create the Charter School Commission, which has now allowed for all of these new charter schools. And look, he's got a record, too, of going in and helping some of these local school systems that could not help themselves, DeKalb County being a great example.
And to that point, I mean, what Deal is talking about is not when teachers fail. It's when the political system behind the school system fails.
What does that mean? Maybe you better explain that a little
local school
better.
boards. I mean,
when local school boards get fractious, when they can't.
Okay.
The best example was Deal himself told of his father being sacked by a local school system in East Georgia because he got crossways with the political system.
If I am a voter in a local district and I elect that school board, am I really going to want to know that the governor, I mean, I understand you've got mixed loyalties there. You're a parent, you want your kids to have a great school, but you've elected these school board
parents
members.
elect their school board members to basically, help make sure that the school is running properly. However, I do want to push back a little bit on Jim. I think that the governor has also said that this is a funding problem. And historically, every governor, Democrat or Republican, has always sort of thought that they could solve this problem with funding. But there's got to be different solutions. There's got to be sort of a very student-driven sort of parental involvement to make sure that these communities are represented by people who look like them that can educate these.
Where are we going to see the biggest opposition to this, Jim, do you think? Who's going to fight it?
Oh, wow, where to begin? One thing I would look at the Common Core opposition that's popped up on the Republican side. That's against standardization. I think that may be a worrisome point for the governor.
Well, I think the School Board Association, when we've had challenges where the state had to come in because of the school boards not being properly trained, DeKalb's a great example because that was such a dysfunctional situation. The state stepped in. The school board brought in a new superintendent who's done a remarkable job. The board has turned things around. And so if you look at what he did in DeKalb, and then you look going back to charter schools, the whole reason why we have a charter school commission is when local school boards reject the charters when they come before them.
So the state gets to
right, and and so I think it's just a pattern. You could see what the governor's done.
So I can see out there within the communities around the state the opposition that will form, but within the legislatures, this isn't a conservative, moderate, liberal issue, is it?
I mean, I think you can spin it lots of different ways depending on where you are. But I think in the end, I think the focus that he's trying to bring, and I think Theron has got a lot of good points in terms of who goes into those communities. But if schools aren't working, and in the end, if children aren't getting educated, you can't solve that with money. You can't throw more money at the school system and the school doesn't work itself. But you have to figure out a way to solve that problem. And I think that's what he's trying to do.
But in Georgia, we're spending right now $14,000 per kid. And so even in Atlanta, I think you're spending, roughly around that. Yeah. So the issue is not funding. It's about making sure that you really work with these school boards and these local officials now to try to help some.
And that's a key point, because when Deal took control of the DeKalb school board, and I think he removed 9 of 12 members, he was very careful about who he replaced them with, and in the future that. Somebody might not take that care.
All right, we got 1 minute, as long as we're on the subject of state schools. What about this bill that's proposing that, and it's been talked about before, appointing rather than electing the state school superintendent? Is that headed anywhere in this session?
Never happened.
I think it's going to be a challenge because you're taking away the right to people to elect, although I think it's good public policy, and I would go further than just the school superintendent. I mean, I think there's a lot of state constitutional. I'm for a cabinet.
You heard that from Eric Tenenblatt. This is an all-Republican lineup of constitutional officers, but you heard it from the Republican.
I agree.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you all so much for being with us, and I'm really glad you're going to be with me throughout the legislative session. So, day 2 of the 2015 session is a wrap. We'll be back tomorrow night with special coverage of Governor Deal's State of the State address. That'll be at 7. And then at 7:30, we'll have another live edition of the Lawmakers as our panel breaks down the governor's game plan for this year's session. Hope you'll join us for that. And in the meantime, stay in touch with us on our Facebook page or email us at lawmakers@gpb.org. We want to hear from you. And we just might share your comments on the air. Thanks a lot for being with us. We'll see you tomorrow night.
This is a GPB original production.